Friends, good evening and welcome to St. James and the Urban Well. It is my delight on behalf of Mother Shana and Father Glenn, myself, Deacon Martha Harris. I'm David Peck, and with the staff and team and people of this parish whose mission and vision brings us together tonight and makes possible inviting our newest friend, Salim Munayer, to us tonight. After 6 weeks in which many of us online and in person, as we continue tonight, have been meeting in the chapel next door, we've used a little book of Timothy Snyder's called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. And we have been studying and sharing together how to be more resilient and effective citizens, both of these amazing United States of America and citizens of the world. This 7th special election night was conceived of when Cordelia came up with the idea of reading On Tyranny together, and then Salim said, I can give you one night in Lancaster only, and it's the 8th of November. I said, great, we'll have it. And I said, better yet, it's a Tuesday night. Better yet, it's election night. And we will be able to come together and offer exactly the application of one of the great lessons of this book, which is, I think, lesson 16. Learn from peers in other countries. That is because Snyder says the present difficulties in the United States are an element of a larger trend. No country is going to find the solution by itself. He adds, keep up your friendships with those who are abroad, and or make friends who come from abroad. And that is a serious issue for us as we gather in this wonderful, hospitable, and challenging history that Lancaster and all of these United States have, and indeed as probably any country has anywhere in the world, because we are trying to live as human beings together in that imperfect world, that world that is steeped, as we know, in the fallen, sinful nature of a humanity that is yearning to be set free spiritually, politically, physically for some, and emotionally for us all. And so it is my joy that in meeting Salim Munayer, whom I had only heard of, indeed started reading his books in Beirut, and thought, I've got to meet this guy if I can. So fortunately, through his son Daniel, who's the current director of Musalaha, the organization that in Arabic means reconciliation, and we'll hear more from tonight, we were able to really glean that subject of mercy that brought us together, and indeed brings Badir and I together tonight, and all of us. And so my thanks to each of you for being here tonight. Before I introduce Salim, though, I want, with us gathering with grateful hearts for all that is imperfect in our lives, but because we have life, because we have breath, because we have this country, because we have this world that God made, and because we have each other, let us start with that gratitude, so that those anxieties that come to us on an evening like this, on a week in a year like this, we can be together and grow more deeply. So what we've done each of the 6 weeks before this is we've had a time of meditation that then leads into a time of reflection, learning, and input. And that's because, as we know in our own human anthropology, that we know with our heads, and we so often forget that we also know with our hearts, and we also forget that what we know, what we remember, we carry in our bodies. And if we forget our bodies, if we forget our hearts, then when we put our heads to something, we're only putting the shallowest part of ourselves to work. And so we start with contemplative practice, silence, stillness, simplicity, the beautiful music of Chris Keeney on the oud, to reset us so that our hearts are open, not to really discover what it is that God is saying to us, whether we are in agreement or disagreement. There is something that we need to be tending to, rather than just reacting towards. So the work tonight that I invite you to is a form of meditation that is welcome to people of any faith and no faith. It's a mantra-based meditation that takes a word, a prayer word, whatever word you want to use, as one that you repeat through the next 5 minutes or so, so that we quieten our hearts, still our minds, and remember our bodies. Lay aside all distractions of mind, words, even thoughts and intentions of prayer, so that we can just feel our feet beneath us. I invite you to lengthen your spine, to find that position with your core engaged that is both relaxed and alert. We usually think those are choices instead of combinations. I commend to you a prayer word in Aramaic, which is used by the world community for Christian meditation around the world, a word known well to Jesus and to all in the Middle East who know Aramaic, that language that is such a rich connecting point for Arabic and Hebrew. The word in 4 simple syllables is Maranatha. Maranatha. It means come, Lord. It appears twice in the New Testament and will be repeated often in the Advent prayers. And if you recite that or your prayer word as you will, I'll ring the bell to start, and at the end you can join me in the prayer that you wish to offer, the Lord's Prayer, the Bismillah, and then we'll welcome Salim. Father, who art Dr. Salim Munayer is many things: a Palestinian Christian, an Israeli citizen, a justice and peace builder, an author and academic. He is husband and father, a beloved friend of many, not only a deep thinker, but a contemplative, and someone who knows how important the desert is, not just to avoid or fly over or get through, but as a place that is a meeting and dwelling place, not only to find the voice of God, but the voice of the neighbor, the voice within, the voice of those you love, and hear the voices of those whom you have not yet learned to love. In a lifetime of faith, hope, and love, Salim has known the testing of suffering, the denigration and dejection of marginalization, and the grace of endurance. He recently walked the Camino de Santiago in Spain with his wife, Kay. With their 4 sons, they are remarkable as a peace-building family, as disciples of Jesus, not only as a historic Palestinian man and rabbi, but as cosmic Christ. Salim, we are in your hands for your presentation this night. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Father David, for your hospitality, and your wife and your parish. Really a joy to be with you here. I'm beginning to reflect on this place, on the graves, the marks, the history, the pain. There's a lot to learn from this church and from the people here. What I would like to do tonight is to present before you our experience of promoting reconciliation in the last 30 years in Israel-Palestine. I will not dwell too much on history. More, I will be more sharing the practical lessons. And behind those lessons, there is quite a bit of study of theology, study of social science and peace studies. Of course, we'll not be able to cover everything, but I'll try to cover the main points. And after the presentation, we'll have time for questions and answers. So first of all, if we look into the PowerPoint, Musalaha means reconciliation. And it is a biblical term, it's a language term for the people of the Middle East, also has the same Hebraic root of slicha, forgiveness. And in it, what I would like to share, the first lessons that we learn as a result of our failure is many times out of good heart, good intention, we want to promote reconciliation. And we start and we fail and we give up. And as young professor, I was attempting to bring Israeli and Palestinian students together. Growing up in a mixed city, in multicultural, multi-religious, so I thought it would be easy. And that was during the first Intifada in the early 90s. And repeatedly, we failed. I failed several times. So kind of not only joking about it, so I thought my students are not mature, did not study, they're not spiritual enough. So maybe if I bring a group of pastors from each community, pastors spend a lot of time with God, prepare teachings in depth in the scripture. When I brought the pastors together, it was worse than the students. So I asked myself many, many questions. Why? So the models that were in the country at that time, to a large degree until today, one model is interreligious dialogue. Interreligious dialogue, the people that came to those meetings, they were mainly educated, English-speaking, from the Christian side, from mostly the Jewish side. There were Anglo-Saxon rabbis that came to the meetings, and a few Muslims. Conversation was in English, trying to see how religion can or cause conflict. It was very much not dealing with the reality of the land, that dealt more in the context of the European Christian Jewish experience, especially of the post-Holocaust. It was Western in a sense that thinking religion is the cause of war. And if we address religion, things would be okay, but did not filter down, did not address our issues. The other model is people to people. This is a model very much promoted by the US government and many governments around the world when they do peace around the world. People to people is a model that says if people meet, people develop relationship, people will get to know each other culture, things work out. In our area, in Israel-Palestine, we have found out that in half a year after the meeting, the impact of the meeting fade away, and there's no lasting impact. There's no change that happened with the people. So looking in all of that, that led me to start a journey, a pilgrimage. And in that pilgrimage, one of the first lessons that we have learned, what type of conflicts we're dealing with. And that led me to one school that I would like to present it. The second slide, please. One school that came out of Tel Aviv University by scholars named Daniel Bartal, that he defined the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as intractable conflict. The characteristic or the feature of this conflict is between two communities. And it is violent, it's demanding. All aspects of society are involved and affected by the conflict. Zero-sum mentality is the people think if I give in a little bit, I'll lose everything. And with time, if the conflict is not being resolved, the people in the two sides, the three sides of the conflict, they develop what he called the ethos of the conflict. Who we are, why we're right, why they're wrong. We forget the reason why the conflict started, maybe about water, about land, and the story, the narrative, the historical narrative, become the biggest obstacle. And instead of dealing with the core reason for the conflict, you find yourself bound by the ethos. And if that moves from generation to generation, religion and competing religious worldview and identity are being affected by the conflict. So if conflict started because, for example, in our area about land and sovereignty, so immediately the issue of identities become the big issue. Identity is the first casualty of conflict as individual, as a group. And what we find out here is that the dominant group, with time, they become more right-wing and more religious. And you see it around the world in many places where the dominant group, the strong group, take more right-wing political view, and also use religious language. The lessons is from this one is first layer diplomacy. That means political actors are very limited in their ability to resolve the conflict. Conflict between political actors, between states, will be resolved by the head of the states. If there is conflict between Canada and US about fishing right in Alaskan water, the president, prime minister will meet, resolve it. As we have a case right now between Israel and Lebanon, there were disputes about the gas resources in the Mediterranean Sea. The leaders met, the United States came and helped, and in 10 years negotiation, they came to agreement, resolve it. But several presidents, world leaders, attempted to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they failed, because it's not between state actors, it's between communities, between tribes. And in this type of conflict, grassroots movement is essential to resolve it. It's from bottom up, what we call second and third layer diplomacy. Without that type of a movement, political actors will be able to resolve it. What we find out also, that in this type of a conflict, that if we are able to mobilize 3.5% of the population to be dictating them life to resolve it, are able. And this is a study done by political scientist Karen from Harvard when she studied nonviolent. And she found out in nonviolent movements of people from bottom up, second, third layer diplomacy, putting pressure, they were able to resolve it. And if women are involved, women are change agent of society, the percentage go up to 65% and more. When violent conflict, when violence has been used in conflict, it was less than 25. You can read about her finding in many literatures that she have published around the world. So we need grassroots movement. We need to mobilize women. But also in this type of conflict, there are other essential issues that need to be addressed. It is when people live in a proximity toward each other, only dealing with justice that can lead to revenge, and building a relationship and not dealing with justice can lead to normalization of the oppression. So we need to address both of them. So here you see in the desert, I'll talk about it more, we have the grassroots movement, group of young people involved, and in the next one we see group of women from East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem are meeting with each other and also addressing the need of change of heart, not only addressing and essentially systematic injustice that has to happen. And in the next PowerPoint that we will show how other people perceive the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Many scholars right now are not, almost all of them in agreement that we need to define the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the framework of settler colonial. That means there is native people and a group that come from outside because being persecuted for their ethnicity, for their religion, for economic reason, for a political reason, like many people that come to the United States of America, they came with ideology that they are coming to fulfill a destiny. There is a concept of return, that the native people, we questioned their identity and their presence in the land and how they treated the land. We are going to make the desert flourish. And usually, in most cases, settler colonial are supported by imperial power. So in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Zionist movements, the national movement of the Jewish people that came up as a result of the condition, the hard condition of the life of the Jews in Eastern Europe, and they wanted to leave, and the Western doors were closed. Britain, America, and Canada, they were looking for a place, but also looking to transform and change their life. It's internal transformation movement and also looking for safety. Since 1917, with the Balfour Declaration, most scholars define it as settler colonial. But what's important about settler colonialism? The gap of the imbalance of power. One side, in the slide that you saw, tank, modern tank, sophisticated tank, one of the most sophisticated tanks in the world. The soldier inside, of course, is fearful for his life. But that boy, the Palestinian boy in Bethlehem here, throwing stones toward the tanks, and that will maybe scratch the paint of the tanks. Will not change the reality. So the gap of power has several ways to express itself. One way, it's divide and control. Other way, it's encouraging, inciting the weak to use violence in order to justify where you're strong, I have the right to defend myself. And that's what you hear in the news all the time. The powerful not only divide and control, the powerful will use the people in the patriarchal system, the elders, the leaders, they give them position of privilege in order to make the occupied people or the weak people, the native people, quiet for incentive that they give to the powerful. And we see it all the time. We see it in South Africa, South America. We saw it here with Native American when they did the deal, and then they broke it with the chief of the tribes. They used them to specify the people. The worst thing that happened to people in this settler colonial process, that they embrace the view and the identity that's been projected towards them by the powerful. And they believe in it. And one of the most important aspects of reconciliation is restoring the identity of the weak, the victim, the oppressed. If you look into the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus did not talk so much about the Roman Empire, or he didn't talk so much about the Sadducees, the leaders in the temple. He talked about the people, the average. Because reconciliation, the power of reconciliation with average people, the human being, the simple one, that when they have restored their identity in God through Christ in that situation, they are empowered to bring change to society. And a small group of men and women have changed the world who would have believed at that time that Jesus and disciples, that today at Lancaster, there are people that are worshiping him. Look, the impact of the world change that happened. Why is that? Because the powerful want to paralyze us. They want us to be silent. They're so fearful they'll do everything and to sell us the lie that we cannot bring change. In the concept of return, it's very, very, when I read settler colonialism, I was kind of laughing, and my wife heard me laughing reading academic paper. And she said to me, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "I just read about Minnesota." She said, "What about Minnesota? We have friends living there." I said, "The settlers that went to live in Minnesota from Scandinavia, they said, we are returning back to our homeland." And she said, "What are you talking about? Scandinavia is their homeland. Norway is their homeland." No. We, the Viking, we discovered Minnesota before the native people. So you have the concept of return to the origin. It's come with theology, with religion and justification and oppression of other people. Settler colonialism have many expressions, many ways, but the most damaging way is when distort human identity, destroyed us and oppress us, and doesn't give us the ability to be full who we are in God. So looking at that, and if we move to the next one, this is the gap of income between Israeli and Palestinian. Matter of fact, the gap is much higher. Right now, average Israeli make $45,000, and the Palestinians still in that level. It's deliberate. It's purposeful. It's not that people are lazy. People are working hard. And when we move more into it, if we move ahead, please. So we found there are, in order to have reconciliation, there are two essential things that has to come together. The one that I talk about, normalization and justice. Finding forum to develop relationship and trust. Israeli don't need to trust Egyptian or Lebanese, but Israeli Jews need to trust their Palestinian neighbors, and Palestinians then need to trust their neighbor. If I bring it into your context, Republicans need to trust Democrats, and Democrats need to trust Republican, or African American need to trust white. And that's type of conflict. This is a conflict that you're dealing with. It's community conflict. So where you develop trust, community, you talk to people, people don't trust each other. People are fearful of each other. But as you find a forum to develop relationship and trust, you cannot ignore the reality of systematic injustice. You have to deal with both of those issues. Many times I hear people, peace will come, we need justice in order to have peace, yes, but also we have to have relationship. Because if you don't change the heart, when the weak becomes strong, you will revenge what's happened before. That's happened in many countries where massacre happened. In a minute, the people that have been abused, massacred, in a minute they got strong. The first thing they did, they attacked the people that attacked them. Okay, so those two things are important, but in order to get to those two things, we have several obstacles that we need to overcome. So let me describe before you the several obstacles. The first obstacles, it's the physical obstacles. Anyone that visits the Holy Land, you see the separation wall, the checkpoint. Well, that's obvious. But when you come here to the state, you'll see people that are living in different neighborhoods with varying access to opportunity. I was driving in Texas with a friend in the highway, and I couldn't help it because I did study some town planning. And then I said to my friend, look how the highway has been built in order to separate different communities of color, skin, do and not do. It's deliberate. I was involved in town planning. Nothing is accident. There is deliberate plans how to do that. So that I lived in south part of Jerusalem, in a Palestinian village. We paid the same tax we pay right now to the city of Jerusalem. Where I lived, they never came to clean the street. We didn't have light, and the sewage was in the street. We had to burn our garbage. I live now more in the Jewish side, in the mixed neighborhood in Jerusalem, and every day there's a truck that comes to clean the street. We have a park, we have garden, we have light, and now even we have cameras all over. It's exciting. So with it, there is a lot of misinformation and disinformation because we don't meet with each other. We can't talk with each other. You'll be amazed about how much misinformation, disinformation is going around. I think you have mastered what they call the fake news or the conspiracy and all of that. And that is part of reality of conflict. So as a result, there is violent and perceived sense of violence. So people will be afraid to go to certain places because it's connected with violence. When I was studying Pasadena, people told me, don't go to downtown Los Angeles. I said, why? They said, it's a very violent area. I said, well, I'm coming from Israel-Palestine. So I went to downtown Los Angeles and had the best Mexican food. So there are violent areas, but also there is, especially ladies know a certain neighborhood in the city, you don't walk there. Sometimes it's true, but sometimes it's perceived violent. But sometimes we are being told that is dangerous. And they give us examples of attack on people in certain areas to prevent you going there. From physical obstacles, we go to the next one. It's emotional obstacles. It is really huge and big. Reconciliation is the whole humanity, the whole cosmos, the whole human being. And when you talk to people about reconciliation and peace, it's not only let's agree on how we divide the budget in the Congress. It's more than that. Because people, emotion, are very much involved in the process. One of the most important ones is fear. There is real fear, there is imaginary fear, but there is a lot of manipulated fear. We're subjected all the time to this type of fear of the others, what they will do, what will happen. So there is a suspicion that leads to fulfillment of prophecy. And from suspicion to despair, people give up in my situation. Then being complacency and apathy. Then the powerful denial of responsibility. It's their fault. I didn't do that to them, they will say. Then you move down to anger, hatred, bitterness, and blame. And we divided it. Usually the powerful are in the top, and usually the feeling of hatred and bitterness and anger more on the bottom is for the weak. When you're ashamed, not recognize you're angry. When you see a lot of young people in the Middle East angry, shouting and that, they're angry because they didn't have recognition. They've been shamed. Those expressions, those feelings are important indicators for us to understand what type of conflict and what type of needs people lacking, and as a result, they express it in these different ways. How you deal with that? I had a group of businessmen, and they all said they're so fearful. And the fear was obstacle for them to work together, to have venture together, and so on and so on. Fear plays an important role. And I'm sure you know that here. People are afraid to talk about certain issue because of the reaction from the others and broken relationship and so on. With us, Musalaha, the next one, we discovered something as I was doing my PhD. The social psychology give us very important tools because most of conflicts around the world are not conflict between individuals, between people, between tribes. And dynamic of conflict between individuals and group is different. Yes, conflict can start between two people. The minute other people join in, there is a dynamic that lead to us and them. We're the good, they are the bad. We are the believer, we are the Christian, and they are the Jews or the Muslims, and vice versa. In that process, we enter into dehumanization. We generalize about other people. The minute you use that language, you lose the image of God of the other. Dehumanization is the pretext for us to act violently against the others. We cannot act violently against the others if we know that the other person is a human being. And dehumanization leads to demonization, where we see the others ultimately in its DNA evil and beyond redemption. And we use ideology and religion to justify that. We use the word crusades, holy war. We use all harem in Hebrew. You use all kinds of languages in the process of demonization. We choose the moral values that we're good at, strong at, and we look into the other and we choose the moral values. We are the weakest. It's very funny when you have Muslim, Christian, and Jews, but it's more than Muslim, Christian, and Jews. Well, the Muslim and Jews brings the Crusades and what's happened to Jews in Europe, and the Christian and Jews bring ISIS and those groups, and now the Christian and Muslim turn to the Jews, talk about militant settlers. So that become the way we judge others. We don't talk about the richness and the beauty of each civilization and religion that exists in Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And that the process of dehumanization, where we have to have the moral superiority. And I saw that very clearly after 9/11. We're the good. They just came and attacked us because they were envy of our lifestyle. And the language, it's moral superiority. Anyone that studied the history of Middle East will not be surprised that because, and I'll offend some of you, the foreign policy of the United States of America has caused many people to be angry in the Middle East. So it didn't come out of the blue. Not only is moral superiority and we become ethnocentric in our dealing with others, and all of that lead to fear of loss of control. So you grab, in the process, you lose. So in that process also, if you look into both the Israeli and Palestinian, victimization mentality and the identity become the big issues. When I was a child and studying Israeli Jewish schools, in high school we had 1 week on the Holocaust. Now they start teaching about the Holocaust from kindergarten, and 11th grade high school. They are strongly encouraged to do what they call it March of the Living. They go and visit Auschwitz. What that does to young soul. Palestinian Nakba, the ethnic cleansing, going to places where destroyed villages and cities. When you have victimization mentality in your identity, you blame, there's no partner for peace. You blame the other for not having peace. When you have victimization mentality, you allow yourself to act violently against the others. Because where were the world when they killed us? So international law, morality, ethics fly out of the windows. When there is victimization mentality, is that what happened, you are so wrapped on your victimization and you don't realize you become slave to those that act violently against you because you're not freeing yourself from victimization to be who you are as an individual and the people group. If you tie yourself all the time with the Nazis, you tie yourself all the time with the apartheid, you tie yourself all the time with those slave owners, and that's very dangerous for community because you become a slave to that narrative. You don't have alternative narrative to free you. In it, also trauma, we discover it as a very important. In this drawing, we have many drawings that was during the Second Intifada. On the left, this is Palestinian children. You know, children, you ask them to draw what they feel. And there's nothing like children drawing, expressing their real feeling. And you see here also the imbalance of power. Here in the left, tanks, helicopters, and children being shot and killed, and homes being bombed. On the other side, you have Israeli Jewish kids fearful of suicide attacker. And look how they draw them and put that. That's children. Children tell the truth many times. It's very powerful. By the way, recently, in the last few years, some researcher from Cambridge, something good came out of Cambridge, other than Father David and his wife is over there. They checked the chemicals in the body of teenagers that are in conflict. And we are discovering that people in conflict, there is change in the chemical and hormone in the body that has effect on the brain. If you look into our website, we did a webinar, the brain trauma and reconciliation. So we are really, for example, British soldiers in Northern Ireland were very content during the conflict. When they did the peace agreement, they were depressed. The body release things. But that is another conversation that we need to look into. So from that, from the next one, One of the things that we discovered in Musala has 6 stages. I'll describe them, then we'll have questions and answers. The first stage that we discovered, that what we all do, must do, it's, if we can put the next one, please, it's what we call it the kumbaya, hallelujah, dipping the hummus. And this is where you meet in neutral ground, you participate in non-threatening activity. It's like the first date. You know, you're excited, you meet in a coffee place, or you go to cinema, and at one side you want to present yourself in the most positive light, but also you're very cautious about if that Mr. or Mrs. Right or whatever in that. So there is a lot of excitement, but there is a lot of curiosity. And this is one of the reasons many churches fail, because they do stage 1. When they move to stage 2, did not prepare, the people. What happened is grievances coming up, opening up, and usually people start leveling the charges toward each other. So I'll give you an example from Pasadena time. When I was there in the 80s, the police at that time was stopping almost every other black young man in the street. So there was a meeting in the church in order to deal with that. In that meeting, the black folks vent all their frustration from the police, from the establishment, on the white folks that came to the meeting. The white folks that came to the meeting, we're the good one, we want to understand you. And they become the victim of the frustration of the black from the system. So many times what's happened, the powerful group, when they open up, they hear the charges, the argument, and that challenges the essence of their identity, because identity is the first victim as individual group. We're the good people. We are the land of the free. We have equal right for everybody. You know, if you have a problem, you go to the court and you get your rights, and everybody, if work hard, will make it. That's not true. Because that speak about themselves. So in our situation, when the Palestinians share the grievances from the settlers, from the army, from all their situation, and so the Israeli Jews become so defensive, and in the end they say, if you don't like it, go to Syria. And we're becoming the accusation toward each other. So what the white folks did in Pasadena, they moved to Colorado. This is where they came from last time. And you have a movement, exodus of people that able economically from one neighborhood to another. That was funny. So that lead to the third one is withdrawal. This is where we got stuck. We did a meeting, and again, every year, and you'll meet people say, oh, I was in a meeting between Arabs and Jews, and I had nothing coming out of it. I heard it. As a matter of fact, it's confirmed what my father told me about the Jews or the Palestinians. I have been there, they say. So why are you inviting me again? As a matter of fact, people that have been in that process are they're less likely to join reconciliation people who haven't been there. As a matter of fact, people that met, I have a group of Israeli Jews that came out of religious orthodoxy. The first thing that they want to do is to meet Palestinians. They were so curious. And they think, oh, we are young, we are free, we came out of that community, we'll be able to have reconciliation with the Palestinians. They meet with them, and they are shocked what they hear, what they experience from the outside. That's what's happened with many people, because there is a huge gap of experience, of knowing, and the reality of the life of the others. It's painful, and we want to reject it. We want to deny it. So the question here happened, how to counter that, how to deal with it. That was my question. I'm asking myself for a while, for a few years. How are we going to change it? How are we going to break it, if there is any way to do it? So withdrawal can be positive and negative. The negative, if we put the blame on the other side. The positive, if we check ourselves, maybe we have contributed to the conflict. But how are we going to enter into the process where we reflect and see how we contribute to the conflict as individual or group or people? That's very hard. And that's led us to the next, that is one theory called contact hypothesis. That basically, contact hypothesis says not every encounter between people work out. There is, I give that example all the time, is when I was elementary school, they were teaching us home, how they call it, like at that time, how to bake, how to cook. Home economic, thank you. You're young like me. They don't do it anywhere, by the way, I discovered. So they told us to do, they asked us to do cake. And I saw how my mother did the cake. So I put flour, water, milk, eggs, and mix it, put it in the oven. It was a disaster. Many times this is the way we do with reconciliation. But in order to have that process, there is those condition or fundamental encounters, have equal status in the context of meeting each other. How can we have equal status in occupation? How can we have equal status, this theory said, in one people group that have and another people group that doesn't have? How can you have equal status if you have two separate laws? Then you have to share common goals, but we compete with each other on the same resources, same land. This is my land. No, this is my land. Have little no competition between them. Be supported by authority figure. Our authority figure is against it. And one of the teachers in my boys' school said, Salim, I heard you work for peace and reconciliation. I have a great idea. And I said, what's the idea? He said, why don't we have the Jewish school kids play football with the Palestinian school kids? I said to him, they will break each other's legs. It's a good idea. It's competing. You know, if you, I see that you have a lot of football season right now, American football, you know. And in England, for example, they don't allow the mix on the stadium of the teams from both sides because usually there is battle there. It was cases that many people got killed on those kind of event between the fans they're playing just football, but the fan were killing each other. So those contact hypothesis is really good, but still doesn't resolve the problem. Until we, out of desperation, the early 90s, I discovered the desert. That was Father Davis was talking about. I took a group of 15 Israeli, 15 Palestinians. I was desperate. I was tired of them. Said, I'm going to punish you. I'm taking you to the desert. We're going to cross the desert on camels. Of course, I didn't say them, I punish you. I said, you know, you have to incite them to go to the desert. So it's going to be good. So we went and we stayed in big Bedouin tent. And then I brought 15 camels and we start, and each camel we put Israeli and Palestinian, and we start crossing the desert. Because you're contemplating a church, in the beginning, there was quite a lot of noise, excitement. As we, with the step of the camels, quietness people become quiet. People are beginning to listen to the quietness of the desert, to the steps of the camels, beginning to hear, to listen to each other. The desert in the scripture is a place where slave people found their freedom. The desert is a place where slave mentality has to be broken in order to be free people. The desert is a place where people run away from God, and they find God there in the quietness. Remember the prophet Elijah. The place of refuge for criminals, Desert nature, the awesomeness of it, the quietness, the stars at night, doesn't, the one cannot help understand the greatness of our Creator. And in the desert, the other become essential for your survival. It is not competing for your survival. Without him or her, you cannot survive the desert. In the desert, you discover yourself in the other. It's an identity transformation that people go through. As individuals, a group. In the desert, it's not we, the Jews and Arab. In the desert, it's we, the Musalaha group. How we are going to survive together and without knowing where safety or water and that supplies for us. As deeper we go into the desert, we become closer to each other. How hard it is, how closer we come. And the walls between us are broken. So the desert become the place where, what is the forum to develop relationship and trust? What is a place where it's not we're the good and they're the bad? That, really, it's more complicated. It's not black and white. It's many colors of people. This is the reason God took the children of Israel, because they were slaves. They didn't like Moses. They wanted to go back to Egypt. That's what's happened in conflict. The weak got used to be oppressed and want to go back to that oppression mentality. To break it, they had to go through the desert. And of course, as we know, some didn't make it. Majority didn't make it, by the way. So for us, the desert becomes essential aspect of it. And from that, we're talking in the process of year and a half, the people go through it. We go to the most important stage. We did not solve the problem, but we know what's work and doesn't work. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? And that is the important things. Here, there is the hardest time where you feel stuck, distant, bitter, defeated, and frustrated. This is where spiritual growth starts. This is the walk on the valley of death, or how you call it in English. Where if you feel good about yourself, why should you change? Why should you? People want to run away from that feeling, go back to the old way, where we are the right and they are the wrong. They want to run away until reality will hit them in between their head, as we say. So this is where you examine your identity and you examine your people. There is time that you need to do self-reflection and affirmation. And you can also do it on the expense of others. You can do that, but you don't grow. You don't grow. You don't change. You don't solve the situation. And the next one is where, in order to do this reclaiming identity, no, you jumped, sorry. You want to begin a relationship? Okay, continue. Thank you. What is needed is for change. In many conflicts, and I do it in university in the state, and I also did it in Boulder, Colorado the other week. By the way, this is in Wadi Rum. If any one of you don't know, Wadi Rum is one of the most beautiful desert in the world. If you saw the movie Lawrence of Arabia, this is what it took. It's protected UNESCO. It's huge, sand, beautiful desert. And this is a group of young adults we took, and I'm here kind of on the edge, not in the middle of that bridge. This photo is very important because how you bridge a gap and what is a gap. So you have the Israeli historical narrative. If you come to my office, you'll find like almost 70 books to 100 books about Israeli historian talking about the Israeli Jewish position. And next to it, another 60 to 70 books written by Palestinians about the conflict, and took me to write this book, reading almost all of those books. This book, when I started writing it with a Jewish colleague, the easiest, the fastest stage, writing with another person is difficult. Writing by itself is difficult for you alone, because you're not happy with yourself, and especially if you don't write, your English is not your first language. The biggest problem we had is who started the conflict? What we call the history of the narrative of the conflict. Where you start? You start in Abraham or you start in Balfour Declaration? The historical narrative was so difficult. For a year and a half, I was going back and forth. Every sentence we're writing, we agreed, then he come back, said, no, I'm not happy with that, or I'm not happy. He, in the end, could not stay in that process, and he pulled out about the historical narrative, not about the theology. So I had to find somebody else to do it. It is like one of the groups that I had. The Republican narrative and Democratic narrative is becoming so trenched that people have a hard time listening to each other. It's so trenched, so deep. Ours is deeper. So what do you do in that situation? Because the historical narrative is key, because the historical narrative talk about identity, talk about legitimacy, its unity of the people group, its motivation for action. It is selective on the truth. In our narrative, we put evidence that support us and our people group. It's like when we were kids, we wanted to go to a place we knew our parents didn't want us to do. So we said, oh, we're going to visit a friend. But on the process, we do something else. I'm sure I'm the only one who did it. You don't do it. So we choose to tell the truth to serve our purpose. It's selective for purpose. So what we do in that process, you have to give exercise and teaching about listening. Are we able to listen to each other narrative without agreeing, but listening, understanding, and respecting? That's very hard. If we're not able to do that, there's no progress. And the way to do it is really very, very essential. So today, this morning, I did it a little bit with a group of interns with Eastern Mennonite. I said, can you write the narrative of you Mennonite and the immigrant coming? And they were sitting, before they were sitting quiet, but when you put them a piece of paper and start writing, they start writing, and they were able to write it. And you can also ask them to act it. Also, you can ask them to make a play from it. You can do many, many ways for people to present their narrative without being offensive to others. Listening, understanding, not having to accept. Then the third stage is building a joint narrative. Groups that are able to build a joint narrative, they were able to go ahead with the process of reconciliation. Building a joint narrative doesn't mean you give up on your distinct identity. Building a joint narrative is, or you embrace others by keeping your identity. I'll just give you an example. The state of Israel, for example, say it's a Jewish state. In a minute, it's a Jewish state. All the people that are not Jews are going to be excluded, are going to be marginalized, are going to be upset. If I come and say that the United States of America is an Episcopalian state, Well, not too many people would be living in that state in one first, but they will exclude all group of people. Immediately, you cause tension, hostility, anger, rejection, shame, because you don't recognize who I am as a people group. So instead of, you need to find term of identity that will include me and the others. Switzerland is one model. You had the French, the German, the Italian, and the Romans. This is a group of people there. And they were fighting each other for a long time until we're Switzerland. We're a land of the Swiss. But the Swiss are French Swiss, German Swiss. They're still German, but they're Swiss. French, the Swiss. So do you understand what I'm trying to say? So you have to build a joint narrative, where in that narrative you reconstruct your identity by keeping your identity, transforming some of it, but including the other in it. And that's really important in development. In group from Rwanda, the Hutu and Tutsi. So when they had group of coming from Hutu and Tutsi and the massacre and all of that, so they were so fearful to go back to this tribal identity, because so painful, bring a lot of memory and pain. I said to them, okay, build your historical narrative. They said, no, we are Rwandan. Because Rwanda become something to help them to avoid the tension of the tribes and that. So each people group have to develop it. In it, if we move on, is you have to do several things. It's really important. It's not only sitting in the classroom and writing and doing it. It requires redeeming memory to counter victimization. Miroslav Volf wrote the books End of Memory. He's in Yale Divinity School. He's a Croatian that suffered from the communism, and his family suffered a lot. And we met before his book has been published, and we talked about the victimization mentality among our people. And when he wrote this book, he gave the tools of the Exodus narrative. Yes, we were slaves, but God delivered us. But the redemptive memory, remember you were slave in Egypt, so you do not do what happened to you, because God is watching the weak. It's not only when you're powerful, remember you were one time powerlessness. Many people will discount that, but the warning of the prophet Moses, as God was with you against Pharaoh, God will be with the weak when you abuse them. Another thing that redeeming memory is every Sunday. Do that in my memory, what Jesus did for us on the cross. Is we need to redeem our memory, because our memory is not set. Our memory is being used for the current conflict. We choose and pick from our history for the present conflict that we are in. And we do that all the time. And our trauma become the fuel for us demonizing other people. One of the things that struck me the first time I visited Yad Vashem, the old structure of the museum, is you go through how the Nazis dehumanized the Jews. As you come in, demonize the Jews. As you're coming from the one visited the old one, suddenly you see the photo of the Mufti of Jerusalem. The Palestinian become the continuation of the Nazis. I was shocked. And how also the Palestinian using the language and using symbols. And in a joking manner, when I was coming from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, I had to cross checkpoint and traffic. And so I was in the class early every day. I have 8 o'clock class. And one of my students that all the time was late. As one time I lost it. You as a teacher never lose it. One time Losset said to him, I don't understand you. I said, I come from Jerusalem, the traffic of Jerusalem, going through the checkpoint and all those people and sometimes dangerous. And I'm in the class here 5 minutes before, but you live in the dorm next to the class. You just roll from your bed into the class. Why cannot you do that? He said, you don't understand. I said, what I don't understand? He said, the occupation. The occupation, teacher. Everything is occupation. Running away from responsibility, change, and all of that. So with it, there is issues that's very important to give people dealing with trauma. Seeking forgiveness and healing plays an important role. We just finished writing a chapter on collective trauma and generational trauma. So you pass the trauma from generation to generation. And trauma plays an important role. And resilience is one of the cure to trauma, but that's another thing. But also we did talk about identity transformation. There's two stages that I will talk. Stage 5, quickly. This is a stage where committing and returning. You tend to take risk, and understanding that both sides have legitimate charges. Here, raising that we all created, especially with people of faith, that there's no concept of not believing some form of God in the Middle East, by the way. We don't have this, what you call secular people like in the West. They don't believe it. Each Muslim, Christian, Jews, Palestinian, Israeli, they all believe in God. It's a question how much you keep what they believe or you think your religion is asking you to keep. The atheist is a very small community. So that's big. Common humanity, common destiny. You start working on that. We live in the same land and all of that. Then the next stage, the stage 6, is where we address injustice. This is what Daniel, that is now the CEO, he said this is our weakest, and true. Because when coming to take action, the powerful people mostly back off. They can allow themselves. So he's developing the whole concept of co-resistance, that reconciliation without action to resist the oppression, and having both Israeli Jews and Palestinians working to do that, that's essential to have a crack in the wall that we are of, that divide us, that cause hostility and enmity between us. Because how you mobilize people to do that, how you make people willing to pay the price in order to bring the change. Okay, that is a big challenge for us right now for the next few years. So I'll stop here for questions and answers. Just want to say a few things. This is a book I showed you about the history of the conflict and also the theology, and this is the 6 stages. Sadly to say, usually you travel sometimes and all the books sold, and sometimes you travel and none of the books sold. So I brought 50, and the people of Colorado took most of them. So I have left only with 3 copies. I give it to Father David, and he will take from you $20 and 200. And also, as you're asking questions, if some of you want to receive more information, please write your name, and I will give a pen here and addresses. It's once a month we give report, an article, and reflection on the situation and reconciliation. So a lot of people find those newspapers are very useful. So if maybe I started from this group, and if you have a pen, or you can use mine. If you, okay. So well, let's start the question and answer.
Salim, first of all, let us thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Give you some time for some liquid refreshment and for us to formulate some questions and just use this moment. Maybe stand up as you want. You can keep seated if you want. You've been standing all this time. You worked hard. These guys can stand up. Just to remind ourselves where we are, who we are, that we are in these bodies and need to just be where we are. And then as we sit back down again, to ask ourselves where is that same question in our body? Because of course, where we're feeling defensive, you feel it in your body. And if you stay in the same position, you stay with the same question. You stay with the same suspicion, you stay with the same assumptions, and then maybe it shifts, and maybe it doesn't. So, allow yourself now. Is your question still your question? Is your feeling still your feeling? And as we come with these questions, let's ask it with the intention of I and me and my, instead of, well, do they say this about them? As Jesus said, who do you say that I am? I feel this. How might you feel this, or how might I feel this differently? So try to be in touch with your own heart, your own person, your own body, and your own narrative, your own story, as we enter our questions and these very sensitive conflicts that we want to come to with humility and tenderness. That might kill all the questions. I'm sorry. But now, friends, what is with you? Salim is good to go for about another half an hour. No, he is going to bed soon. And so are you. I know you're not interested, but who's got some questions? We'll go with Donna and then Lissa.
So, Salim, I'm putting myself in the position of someone whose group has suffered a great deal, and suppose I take this step to try to forge a new future with my new enemy friends, and separate myself from my own historical people. Do I become physically vulnerable? Do I incur danger to myself by leaving the pack, my historical pack? And is there a proper role for memory, the memory of my past pain, my group's past pain?
Yeah, you're right. The most difficult, even individuals are convinced with what we do. The pressure of the tribe many times stronger than the individual belief. So that is part of what we are trying to find out, what we need to do to help people to leave the pack in order to form a new group of people that fight for peace and justice. We are not asking people to let go of their identity, distinct identity. We're not asking people to, what we're asking people that their continuous victimization mentality is destroying them and not their enemy. I'll repeat it. When you don't like people or you hate people eating you from inside, and your enemy doesn't even feel it. He doesn't know that you hate them. So there is a need of a lot of studying, a lot of mentoring and encouragement of that. So this is the reason the people in power try to do physical segregation. They try to do fear. They use financial incentive for you not to leave your pack. But going out of the pack, or what Jesus said, going out of the, Jesus used going out of the camp. Only when you go out of the camp, you find yourself, and you find your God, and you find the others by going out of the camp. And in it, there is something very, very important that we need to remember, is that very few Germans were willing to go out of the camp, and Germany paid higher price for that more than staying in the camp. So how you explain that to people? Germany got destroyed in Second World War. German women that were under the Russian occupation, almost each one of them got raped. It's the soul of the German people has been destroyed in that war because they were not willing to go out of the pack. And we have to stand up. Jesus uses the term of the sword for that. I don't know if that answers your questions. So we don't have a choice. We have to do it.
I think you kind of addressed what I was going to ask, but usually in these kind of groups, I feel like you're preaching to the choir. And so do you have any tips or ways that you try to bring in folks that are really entrenched and they really don't feel like they want to hear it?
Yes, there are many ways. As a matter of fact, many people, groups are tired talking about peace, about race. They said, we're there. So you can start interest group, medical group, environmental groups, high-tech groups. You start joint interest group for each community to bring, and in the process you talk about it. Because in a minute they hear the word, let's talk about racial issue, let's talk about peace and justice, many people say, I don't want to go there. So try to find the interest, several interests. Women groups interest. For example, you'll find many immigrant women will meet with local women, and help in that can open a door. Another questions? Who raised his hand? I saw somebody.
I think it was Martha. Great.
Sorry?
This may be the last one. If you've got energy for one more after this, that's your choice. But
I have energy. I don't know. I have energy. I don't know about.
The good news is this conversation is going to continue because we've got different ways to be in touch. But Martha, carry on.
Well, Salim, thank you so much for your work and your thoughtful description of the process you go through to really achieve that conflict resolution. I'm curious about the time frame. How long does it take to move a group from stage 1 to stage 6? And is the focus of your work individuals or representatives of different organizations that you're trying to work together with?
Yeah. For the first question, one of the best group from stage 1 to 6, usually 5, 6, we still struggle between year and year and a half. Between 1 year and a half, every group that come together, they commit themselves to 10 meetings. They have to be in 8 meetings of the 10. And with the holidays and all of that, take a year and a half. And every meeting, it's a weekend. They start, it's 2 days, sometimes 3 days. So there's activities, there is prayer, there is studies, there is all kind of things that you do in the meeting. The other thing is that we are targeting a certain segment of society that we think that will bring change. One, young youth, young adult, summer camps for children to start there, civil society, women, and also right now I'm doing with medical people involved in medical hospitals, especially dealing with trauma from both sides. Because the medical field, people feel like it's a safe place to come and talk so those groups of people that we are targeting as segment of the society. And in the beginning, it's hard. My problem is not recruiting people. For example, in civil society, the new mayor of Bethlehem is one of our graduates. He's the youngest mayor in the history of Bethlehem. And he said the first things when I came to Sel to bless, or to say Mabruk, Mabruk just means blessed for your new position. He said, Salim, why don't we do the same things with us, with the town city of Beit Jala and Beit Sahur? It is another Christian town and between the people. It's growing. My problem is not recruiting people. My problem is more capacity in financial area. That's the problem we have right now. It is, yes. It's not one-time meeting. Yes, people go through intense program. There is a lot of tears, a lot of love, a lot of food, parties. You have to have all of that. Sorry? Oh, yes, a lot of fellowship. Fellowship is very important. Dancing, party, like during holidays, we bring each other food and we teach each other culture and dressing, and it's fascinating. It's rewarding, but it's painful. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Yes.
Thank you, Salim. And we will just close with this simple prayer that one of the things that is great, first, being in taking a stand in any kind of setting at this stage in our world can be difficult and painful. One of the things that allows us to do that with less exposure and more humility is history. And there is not one history, but by exploring history. And one of the things that I think is very useful is historical texts, because they're out there. They're not just me manipulating you with my words. So I love the Book of Common Prayer, not because it's perfect, but because I didn't write it. Nobody here wrote it. It is full of language from both the 1970s and the 1570s. And that span of language means that we are bound by something beyond our subjective language, our own narrative, our own story. And this is a small way to end a huge presentation, a really immense broken heart of the world, broken hearts of people, broken lives, and people on both sides of a conflict who have all the riches of God, His mercy and His grace poured out upon them, and that is not enough. And that is sobering for us as people of faith. And so, as we do so, this is a prayer for an election. And that is a small, humble way to end a very big night, so that we can go forth from here to do our both small and great work. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, to whom we must account for all our powers and privileges, guide the people of the United States in the election of officials and representatives, that by faithful administration and wise laws, the rights of all may be protected and our nation be enabled to fulfill your purposes. And this we ask through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you very much for being here, and good night.